Unpack this a little bit further, we do have the Wits SRC Secretary General as well as the Deputy Secretary of the South African Union of Students, Fasiha Hassan, who joins us live in studio. Thank you so much for joining us here today. It's the 40th anniversary. Can you tell us how has the significance of this day evolved from that fateful day?
I think that from 1976, this is the 40th year, or the 40th anniversary rather. And there's been a lot of questions, a lot of discussion around, particularly before 2015, around the apathy of the youth. I think we were viewed as a lost generation, very apathetic, very uninterested really in the order of the day. And we changed that narrative through Rhodes Must Fall, through Fees Must Fall. We continue to change that narrative in which we too are fighting for access to education. Yes, we're fighting for access to higher education. Perhaps that's a different element to 1976. But essentially, the war that they are fighting, and I'm saying it in the present tense because I think we're still doing it, it was one battle then, but we're fighting another battle under the decolonization project. We must acknowledge that in 1976, it was a fight against the use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. And it was an apartheid symbol, really, that was being fought. But today we are still part of a decolonization project. When we talk access to higher education, it's not just financial access. It's about university culture. It's about black bodies feeling empowered in a university space. Because we must acknowledge that university systems are very Eurocentric. They were never systems that we created on our own or were designed for us. They were designed to educate a small minority and really perpetuate the inequalities in the status quo.
And you were talking about the issues, rather, that you are currently tackling today, the Fees Must Fall campaign. Tuks is also against the implementation of Afrikaans as a teaching medium. It seems as though history is repeating itself.
It's an interesting thing, and I don't think we should say that nothing has changed. That wouldn't be true to say. But it is true to say that there's been a reigniting of the youth, who are now saying that our mothers and our fathers and our grandmothers and our grandfathers did fight for something. They did deliver a democracy and a constitution. But now it's up to us to ensure that it's realized. It's up to us to ensure that there is economic liberation on the ground. And so in many ways, what we're doing is we're picking up the baton from our mothers and fathers to continue the fight and to continue to say that our children and our grandchildren hopefully will benefit from what we do, but then will transform a different space. That's how we're viewing it, not that nothing has changed. And just quickly to speak on this language policy, I think it's important to note that the issue is around the use of Afrikaans as an exclusionary tool. It's not one where we're saying we're totally against Afrikaans. It's about the fact that we're trying to dismantle all of these barriers to entry, one of which has become Afrikaans in terms of a language policy at the University of Pretoria, Stellenbosch, and the University of the Free State.
And now, what about people who weren't born, during this apartheid era, who didn't really experience this? What does this day really mean for them?
I'm one of them, the so-called born-free generation. I think that, and I'll be very honest, that post-1994 there was a desperation to move into a new South Africa. And not unjustified after all of the horrors of apartheid and colonialism. But in that desperation, we never really dealt with racial issues. We never really dealt with those racial disparities. And the reason why I can say that's evident now is quite rightly because I'm a born free. I never lived under apartheid. Yet those racial tensions exist still today. And we saw it it manifest in Fees Must Fall and in Rhodes Must Fall. And so for me and for many of my colleagues and my contemporaries and comrades, ours is to acknowledge the racial issue. So we cannot say that we're in a non-racial space yet. We cannot talk Rainbow Nation until we acknowledge it and until we can say this is what happened. Then only can we dismantle and hopefully move to a space where we can talk about social cohesion.
As you are very much involved in the Fees Must Fall, Rhodes Must Fall campaigns, how do you ensure that the violence of the past does not repeat itself this time?
It's a difficult question to answer. And I think we've seen a lot of violent action over the last few months. And I in no means, I totally condemn violence. Burning of institutions of higher learning for us doesn't make sense. We're fighting for free education. What if government gives it to us tomorrow? Now we don't have institutions to learn at. But we must also acknowledge that the system itself is very violent towards black bodies, towards the working class. And it's not the violence that people typically think of. It's about a structurally racist system. And of course, when one is met with such a violent system, one thinks that we must respond with violence to remove it. And for a student to feel so desperate and so angry that they must burn a library or a computer lab, we must then go back and say, how could someone feel so desperate and so angry? That's what we need to be dealing with.
And what do you have to say to people who feel that Youth Day has lost its meaning, you know, and they feel that it's just another public holiday, they don't attend these kind of events, these celebrations, you know, these commemorations rather?
In many ways, that is what it's become. June 16 has become a public holiday. And we know from the 76 leaders have said that it's not a celebration. Like you said, it's a commemoration. And I would say that in some ways it has lost its meaning. But that doesn't mean that we can't revive it. And it doesn't mean that we should look at it as irrelevant. The fact is there was lives. Every single person who died, it would have been in vain for us to say that it means nothing. Because they fought for something. And we are currently benefiting from what they fought for.
With the elections coming up very soon, how important and significant is the youth in this country right now?
In my opinion, the youth is a make or break. And you see it particularly with all of these political parties now trying to really find relevance with the youth. We're seeing it with the EFF and we're seeing it with other parties as well. And the fact of the matter is that I don't know if any of those parties really speak to us. Everyone can talk a good policy, but we're on the ground. We're currently fighting. And we have to put a question forward. I mean, what was the mistake that we made during Fees Must Fall? And I think that it was allowing partisan politics to use a genuine student struggle and a genuine student movement to further their political agenda. And in many ways has seriously harmed the movement and seriously harmed the credibility of what we were trying to do.
Ms. Hassan, thank you so much for coming through on Youth Day. I'm sure you'll be attending many commemorations today. Thank you so much for your time as well as your guidance of, you know, it's great to hear somebody who is on the ground, somebody who really forms a part of the youth that we are talking about today. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.